afternoon the same way we did this morning, for symmetry's sake, but also hopefully get some more theological perspectives on centering prayer that might enrich the session a little bit later. I just put the Dhyani Buddhas here on one of the pages in case you're interested. Now this is on the leap into the darkness. Where we get so simplified that we disappear. The faculties disappear, and hopefully we do too, as we just heard, but losing ourselves. I'd like to start by speaking a little bit about the pointedness and the simplification and the purification that comes down to like one or two words. All the traditions have things like mantras, etc. Just say a few words about that particular adventure of prayer. First of all, the divine office, the liturgy of the hours, which priests and religious sisters and all they use, and which of course hopefully more and more people learn, is a good example of this. Don't forget that this type of liturgical prayer, the liturgy of the hours, was the very life breath, the very rhythm of the day and of the year, of the week and the year for the church. It is that. It's the prayer of Christ in us, our prayer with Christ. As St. Augustine says, again, Christ prays in us as our head and for us as our priest, etc., that kind of thing. When we chant the Psalms or sing the Psalms or continue the Psalms week by week and year by year, it gets simplified. I remember my monastic superior saying that sometimes when we start a psalm, then a single word or a single phrase will become so fraught, rich with meaning over the years that they just concentrate on that, even though you're singing and saying other things. And this is mirrored already in the repetition of certain verses, like in John Passion, Lord, come to my assistance. God, come to my assistance. Lord, make haste to help me. Psalm 71, the beginning of Psalm 71 or 70, is the one with which we begin every office, every prayer, those verses. They're kind of a summation. They kind of concentrate in one phrase the whole meaning, the whole life of prayer. It's already a good example of what we're talking about. Interestingly, a lot of people in the popular level in the Catholic faith use the Rosary this particular way. The Rosary has a connection to the divine office and to the Carthusians. Some people think that St. Dominic invented the Rosary, and actually it was a Carthusian who invented the Rosary. Seriously. Henry or somebody. And then it was spread by the Dominicans around that same time in the early 13th century. But the Rosary is a poor man's psalter. I think some of you know that. 150 psalms that were used in the divine are used in the divine office, and the 150 Hail Marys. 15 decades traditionally of 10 Hail Marys. And the brothers of those who were illiterate, lay people, or even brothers religious, instead of trying to chant the Latin Psalms, would just say Hail Marys. So that kind of simplification then goes on in the Rosary as well. And by the way, it was just the first part of the Rosary, the Hail Mary. May full of grace, the Lord is with you, blessed be you among women, blessed be you. The second part wasn't added until the 16th century. Nor was the Rosary itself, as I just said, until the second millennium. So just a caution on that. Anybody who ever tells you that you have to say the Rosary if you're a Catholic don't know anything about our tradition. How can the Rosary be necessary if it didn't exist for 1,500 years? All right, so don't buy into that the only way to pray if you're a Catholic is to say the Rosary. All right, it's fine if you want to. But as I say, even that becomes a process of simplification where you may focus, well, as we do, you don't even focus on the words anymore, but on a word or on the mysteries, for example. They say, just focus on the mysteries. And we're back with the life of Christ, right? And then the Ignatius and the whole business again, which is great. So that's how the Rosary fits into the bigger tradition. It's a poor man's divine office, focusing on the life of Christ, all that kind of thing. And it's a simplification process where you become simplified more and more on the presence of God, etc., as you go along. Yes?
Father, since Pope John Paul started the Luminous Mystery, do you think anyone else will start another?
Another, well, what?
Another mystery.
Yeah, well,
for the 5th decade.
It's right. He added that. It doesn't fit into the tradition in this sense, of being 150 anymore, but that's how it started. So I think it was a great idea to add the luminous mysteries, because the whole central part of Christ's life, rather than jumping right from the finding in the temple to the agony in the garden, is you're kind of leaving something out. But yes, but it doesn't fit into the schema traditionally of the 150. My point being raising it here is to see how it fits into a larger scheme in the prayer life of the church, and how it's part of a simplification process. Even when you say the Rosary, you kind of simplifying your focus and your attention. Now, compare that to the Eastern Church, which is the Jesus prayer. It's funny, in the Western Church it's Mary, and on the Eastern Church it's Jesus. That's oversimplifying, of course. But nonetheless, it's true that despite, I don't know if that's the right preposition, despite the devotion of the Eastern Church to Mary, which is very powerful, very strong, the prayer itself is focused strictly on Jesus. Jesus, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, have mercy on me, a sinner, or just Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me, or just Jesus. The way of the pilgrim and the whole thing. So here again, you have an extreme simplification, focus, purification, just down to a single word, which then becomes just kind of resonates within you as you grow in the prayer. Remember, it's not something you just recite with your lips or with your mind. It becomes the reality of Jesus. Remember, Jesus is not out there; he's in here. So the name evokes the presence, and it's a transformative prayer. So you transform more and more into Jesus by the very breath. You're not even saying; you're almost breathing it. So you see how all this fits in to a whole evolution, and it's a technique of prayer. Of the transformation into Christ, just focusing on a single word. Now, a mantra in the Eastern tradition is an energy word, a word that has a powerful amount of energy, which connects you to mysterious realities or entities, etc. For Jesus can become like that, connecting to Jesus, in our own tradition. Or the World Community of Christian Meditation, the John Main School of Meditation, which uses technically kind of a Christian mantra, usually Maranatha. They're our cousins, not our enemies. We're not in competition. It's just a related style of prayer, another way of doing the adventure of prayer, where you use a word in this way. You simplify down to a single word, which then kind of suffuses your whole being, kind of gets evaporates almost into your being. And as part of your transformation process. And of course, when you come to centering prayer, the word is not the focus. It can be an energy word in a sense, but it's not, as you know very well, not the focus, but simply a tool to simplify, to focus on the presence of God in faith. That brings us, closer to these levels here. You might say the word Jesus, or whatever it is that becomes the word, is kind of this level when your whole being is just kind of enraptured in that one reality, that one word going towards the Lord. The way it becomes, the contemplation, is in that utter silence and simplicity, which we're going to talk about more now. The word then disappears, is absorbed. And you all know how transcentering prayer came about from the Cloud of Unknowing. I'm sure you're all aware of that, and the particular passage that it comes from the Cloud of Unknowing, which was written by and that's what they think. It is anonymous, really. So if you want to gather all your desire into one simple word that the mind can retain, choose a short word rather than a long one. A one-syllable word such as God or love is best. But choose one that's meaningful to you. And fix it in your mind so that it will remain there come what may. Be your defense in conflict and in peace. Use it to beat upon the cloud of darkness above you. And subdue all distractions, purification. Distractions consigning to the cloud of forgetting beneath you. Demanding to know, should some thought go on annoying you, demanding to know what you're doing, answer with this one word alone. If your mind begins to intellectualize over the meaning, remind yourself that its value lies in its simplicity. Do this and I assure you these thoughts will vanish. Why? Because you refuse to develop them with arguing. So that's from the treatise, and of course you recognize that as the practice of century of prayer. But to connect this then to the broader tradition, this won't be new to some of you, but maybe some of the connections will be. Where does this cloud of unknowing, this kind of darkness, this come from? That's the ultimate simplification and the ultimate transformation into the silent presence. And then the image here, then, as you see, is this cloud of the unknowing and the cloud of forgetting, etc. Where does that come from in the tradition? What? Concupiscence? Oh my goodness. We don't want keep Augustine out of this. A contemporary of St. Augustine in the East, who deserves to be better known, he actually is called the Father of Mysticism. Not because he was the first mystic, but he was the first mystical theologian with a systematic presentation of the phenomenon of mystical prayer, the St. Gregory of Nyssa. Anybody never hear of him?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm glad you got. So, in the late 4th century, then he was the brother of Saint Basil the Great, and he speaks about a sense of presence, a perception of presence. But his whole theology developed in his treatise on the Song of Songs, for example, and his Life of Moses, which I'll come back to in a second. Speaks about this mystical progress in prayer, where you never stop growing and moving on, where you're not content with a particular level of perception or understanding or knowledge or grasp of the mysteries of faith or of God, but he uses the phrase from Philippians 3 that St. Paul says, I don't consider myself to be already perfect. I forget what lies behind. Consider all else as rubbish. One thing I do, I stretch myself out. Epektinomos in Greek, I stretch myself out towards what lies ahead, the upward call of Christ, of God in Christ Jesus my Lord. So he takes that one word, Gregory does, of St. Paul, and bases his whole spirituality on it. I'm always stretching myself forward. I'm stretching. It's a stretch, I'm going beyond my comfort zone, beyond my current level of knowledge and understanding, always, and from the Song of Songs, he uses the idea of the bridegroom's always saying to the bride, arise, my beloved. So Gregory of Nyssa says, why is he saying arise again? He just said it a few verses earlier, and the bride arose, so why is he saying it again? Because you still have to arise. Wherever you are, you have to rise further. You keep going, deeper and deeper and higher into the silence, into the cloud. That comes from the life of Moses. Which is, so he's commenting on the climbing of Mount Sinai in the book of Exodus. And he's saying, you hear the thunder and the lightning and the sound of the trumpet and all these things he interprets mystically. And then it says, finally Moses entered the cloud at the top of the mountain and the darkness where God was. So that's where it comes from. From the Moses experience in the book of Exodus, commented on by Gregory of Nyssa, and then that entered into the wider tradition. For example, Pseudo-Dionysius, Dionysius the Areopagite. It's called Pseudo-Dionysius because he wasn't really Dionysius the Areopagite. That's from the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 16, I think, where Paul is in Athens and he makes a couple of converts after his speech on the Areopagus, including Denis the Areopagite. So a Syrian monk in the 6th century, we think, took his name from the Acts of the Apostles and wrote this wonderful mystical writings, the Celestial Hierarchy, Ecclesiastical Hierarchy, the Divine Names, and a little treatise called Mystical Theology. So remember, we're here in the 6th century. And he's basing himself on Gregory. And so he has this passage at the beginning of the chapter 1 of Mystical Theology. What is the divine darkness? The title of the chapter. You can read the whole thing, but he speaks about the deepest shadow, overwhelming light. He says, you have to leave behind everything perceived and understood. You know, like the bride, keep rising. Leave behind everything perceived and understood, everything perceptible and understandable, all that is not and all that is. And with your understanding laid aside, to strive upward as much as you can toward union with him who is beyond all being and knowledge. By an undivided and absolute abandonment of yourself and everything, shedding all and freed from all, you will be uplifted to the ray of divine shadow, which is above everything that is. The ray of divine shadow. Paradox. When the closer you get to truth, the more paradox you find. You know, where darkness is light and weakness is strength and poverty is wealth and death is life and all that. So the ray of divine light, and the ray of divine darkness. Divine darkness is a ray. Okay. So you're enlightened by the dark. So that's a very famous phrase from Dennis. The ray of divine darkness. The ray of divine darkness. And at the end of that chapter, he quotes Moses. So it shows that he's connected here to Gregory of Nyssa. Okay, his unimaginable presence is shown. Moses breaks free, away from what is seen and what he sees, and he plunges into the truly mysterious darkness of unknowing. Father of Unknowing. Here, renouncing all that the mind may conceive, wrapped entirely in the intangible and the invisible, he belongs completely to him who is beyond everything. Here, being neither oneself nor someone else. Isn't that great? Remember what I said before? You lose yourself. You're not you. But you're not someone else either. Because you're Christ. Who else could that be? So, being neither oneself nor someone else, one is supremely united to the completely unknown by an inactivity of all knowledge, and knows beyond the mind by knowing nothing. That's what I'm coming to, John of the Cross. So that's what we get in Dennis. And he became a great authority. Everybody thought he was Dennis the Areopagite. St. Thomas Aquinas quotes him almost more than he does Aristotle and Augustine. So he became very mainstream in medieval Catholic theology. Knows beyond the mind by knowing nothing. Don't forget what St. Paul said to the Ephesians. We just had it in the liturgy a few days ago. To know the love of Christ which surpasses knowledge. Another paradox. How can you know what surpasses knowledge? By love, by going beyond. So those are very great phrases there, and it does bring us, as Sister just reminded us, to St. John of the Cross, who speaks about the purgation, the purification of the intellect, the memory and the will, all the faculties that he studied in philosophy. So going beyond the faculties, going beyond the imagination, all those things, to what all that can be known or it's understandable or understood or seen or could be seen, etc., as we just heard, into the, well, what is he called? The cloud of unknowing, the darkness, the dark night, right? The dark night, which unites the lover to the beloved in pure faith. That's what we do. But here's where the real death of prayer, or the life and death adventure of prayer, is really noticeable, because you're letting everything behind, leaving everything behind. These famous verses, some of which are actually quoted by T.S. Eliot in one of his famous poems. He says, "To reach satisfaction in all, desire satisfaction in nothing." In other words, don't cling, don't rest in anything. To come to possess all, desire the possession of nothing. To arrive at being all, desire to be nothing. To come to the knowledge of all, desire the knowledge of nothing. The phrase we just heard. To come to enjoy what you have not, you must go by a way in which you enjoy not. To come to the knowledge you have not, you must go by a way in which you know not. To come to the possession you have not, you must go by a way in which you possess not. And to come to be what you are not, you must go by a way in which you are not. Wow. Beyond what is and what's not, as we just heard. So you can't possess anything, cling to anything, be anything, you can't, you just can't cling to any of that, or identify with any of that, or find your security in any of that, including your prayer. So, those are the dark nights. And you know the different levels of it. We won't talk into too much about the level of sense and the level of spirit, the dark night of the soul, as they say, in which you see that you are not, basically. And that becomes very liberating, but at the beginning it's pretty scary. But you can't rest on your laurels. You have to continue rising and moving beyond, which is what your experience in centering prayer, of course, should be, and in any prayer life that follows its normal course will lead you along that path. Now, one of the complaints, or one of the criticisms, as I'm sure you know, that's leveled sometimes by certain people against centering prayer and similar practices, is that it sidesteps or short circuits the evolution to silence. It doesn't go through, spend enough time on all these other levels. Right? Just yesterday I was reading an article in Cross Currents from a few years ago by Cynthia Bourgeot, saying, well, one way answering that is saying that you're leaping right to here when you're surrendering yourself to God in pure faith. That's kind of the process. So that surrender is, of course, perfectly orthodox and immediate. The way to do that. Nonetheless, if you want to address that kind of criticism from kind of a more traditional stance of John of the Cross, he gives in two places in his work, the Ascent of Mount Carmel and Dark Night, 3 signs, as you may know, by which you can judge whether you're ready to move into this silent contemplation from meditation. Use of your faculty in prayer. And I'll comment on these after I read through them. They vary slightly in their presentation each time. They basically says there are 3 signs. So from Book 2, Chapter 13 of the Ascent of Mount Carmel, he says, the first sign is that you cannot make discursive meditation the way you did before. It's just not doing it for you. You can't think, it's just totally dry. Second sign, you have disinclination to fix the imagination or sense faculties on any particular object. The third and surest sign is that a person likes to remain alone in loving awareness of God without particular considerations, an interior peace and quiet and repose. So you're resting in God. Later in Book 1, Chapter 9 of the Dark Night, he gives signs again. The first is that these souls do not get satisfaction or consolation from the things of God as before, or for creatures either. They can't seem to find satisfaction. They're kind of restless in prayer and everywhere else. Second sign is that the memory turns to God solicitously with painful care, thinking that it's not serving God. I can't pray, what's wrong with me? And, and it's not because they're lukewarm or anything, it's just that they doesn't function as before. And the third goes into some, third sign, powerlessness in spite of one's efforts to meditate and make use of the imagination, the interior senses, as was one's previous custom. Now, I think this is really important. I'm pretty sure you haven't heard a sermon on this recently. You'll often say, well, just pray the Rosary. Just keep doing it. Keep going back and praying. And I think, and I remember one of my Jesuit teachers back when I was very young in the religious life, reflecting on this. He said, and I think he's right, one of the reasons people abandoned the prayer life, or did in previous decades, is that this happened. They couldn't. And they gave up in despair, thinking that they were bad and that they couldn't become holy and it was all their fault. When this is purely the normal, natural evolution of the prayer life. And to answer the criticism about, skipping stages, I discovered personally in my young religious life, and discover in people that I've worked with ever since, that this kind of thing happens very quickly when you start a serious spiritual life. It was within the first year when I was a Jesuit novice. I didn't know what was going on either. I said, why can't I pray? I mean, this is not working. And it was my novice master, who was a Jesuit, therefore, he had his training. He explained to me what it was, and then this whole new world opened up for me, which I never was taught in grammar school or by any parish priest was there. It was only when I, jumped in on this other level that things happened and were explained to me. So this is really important. Because you will find that either in your own life or people you deal with, where they just can't pray the usual stuff. The Rosary is sand in their mouth, or any kind of meditation that they try to do, and work with their mind or their feelings, and try and stir up sentiments and resolutions and all this stuff. It just doesn't work.
I think that's what happened to Mother Teresa.
Exactly. And Saint Therese of Lisieux towards the end of her life. I don't know about Mother Teresa. Saint Therese was certainly not taught, even though she was a Carmelite. I don't think she was taught that what I think happened. And this is speculation. I may be completely off, but I think what happened is that the formulas of the faith, the images and all the formulas and the dogmas and all the way we conceptualize and imagine the faith, went completely dry, as they should. But she didn't have any place to go, except, she was a saint. She was led by the Spirit. She was led through love, as she says. She was led through love to transcend that, to go beyond her doubts of faith, her darkness of faith. But that kind of darkness of faith is supposed to happen. The formulas can't speak to you on the same level anymore because you've gone into the essence of them, the reality of them, rather than the formulation of them. And of course, the reality is always more than the name. Just as you are more than your name, so is God. And please get rid of the word God. It's just a name. It's not even a name. It's a job description. Right? God's name is not God. It's like saying, hi, plumber. It's not a name at all. God did reveal a name, one of the many names in the book of Exodus precisely. I am who I am. But, then that's still just a name, as the Kabbalah would point out. It's not the ultimate. By the way, do you know the ultimate designation for God in the Kabbalah?
No.
Nothing.
No.
Ayin, in Hebrew. Nothing. Nothing. Exactly what we just heard from Dennis. Ayin is just the Aryapatite. So, emptiness, nothing. You can't put any name to it. You can't put any. So this is the kind of life and death adventure of prayer that we're called to, and which we should be experiencing, can be experiencing in our in our spiritual life.
Which is Buddha.
So how do
Which
they-
is Buddha, yeah.
how do they-
That's why Buddhism is there's no problem with Buddhism. It's just pointing out that we're supposed to be without images and without, Buddhism is not atheistic, it just refuses to talk about God, which is what we should do more of.
So how do you get through? I remember one time in my life, and I was at a desperate point like you talked
Yes.
about, and I was throwing my hands up and said, God, I can't do it anymore. He said, good, now I can help you.
Yes. I can't do it anymore, and so now I can help you. Yeah.
I'm really glad that you pointed that out because I've been struggling with a book by a man named Ken Kayasha, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, Kaisch, and it's a book on Christian prayer. And he has this program where he says all of us are leaping into contemplative prayer much too quickly and we're not prepared to it. We're Westerners, we don't know how to concentrate. And so he talks about how he's been meditating for 30 years, and he starts with visualization meditations, sound meditations, then he gets you into more discursive prayer, Lectio Divina, then he moves on to centering prayer, and then union prayer. But he keeps warning the reader, oh no, you can't possibly jump to the next step until you're prepared, and you can only discuss that with your spiritual director. And meanwhile, I started very quickly on centering prayer and immediately got immense benefits from it. So I've been reading this book and feeling really guilty and thinking, oh, maybe I should have skipped all those steps.
I know, we're
I
always
should be
waiting.
spending 20 years preparing to start centering prayer. So I'm really glad you pointed that out.
Yeah,
You're relieving me of my guilt.
oh, thank God. If I did nothing every day except relieve one person of her guilt, I would be fulfilled. Because there's way too much guilt, in our tradition. It's a cheap way of keeping control, guilt and shame, and a cheap, a terrible way of having to feel about yourself. It's certainly not the way God works. Talk about the discernment of spirit. As Richard Rohr says very well, guilt and shame do not lead to God of themselves. To God. Love leads to God, and faith, joy and peace. So it's really important. It's true in the spiritual life, especially as you move forward. It's great to have a spiritual director, someone who's, as I said earlier today, someone who's further along than you and who knows the way. And if there's, so far as there is, knows that there's not a way, but it can help you see, along your path where God may be leading you. That's what the spiritual director is for. And the further we go, we should ideally have someone to help us with that, just as you want to have a good psychotherapist for your psychological issues. And by the way, you have to do both together. I should just point that out in passing, as I've done before. Generally, when you lead a serious spiritual life, you have to have some psychotherapy too. Both because it raises all those issues, and because those issues have to be addressed as and before you can really move forward in some phases of the spiritual life. Otherwise, you get caught up in all sorts of complexes and Freudian stuff, and all it's God the Father and all that stuff. So you really do need to address that. But it's a great adventure, a life and death adventure of prayer. And you see the transformation that occurs, as you leap into this silence and darkness, which is God. You are transformed into God, which is what John of the Cross then also says, and St. Teresa, Jesus for that matter too, that it's the mystical marriage, transformation, transformative union. That's what we move to. So it's not just a simplification and purification, but ultimately it's not just the via unity, but not just the purgative way or the illuminative way, but the unitive way. That's when we become one with God and with ourselves and with everyone and everything else. Christ fills the universe in all its parts, and we do too, because we're one with Christ and with God, that they may be one in us, as you, Father, me, and I in you. That is a real transformation. One of the great images, and I haven't spoken a lot about St. Teresa here, I've been mainly focusing on John of the Cross for our purposes of the dark cloud. She uses many images, the water coming down in various ways, the interior castle, Las Moradas, from John 14. And then the image that I love the best is from Book 5 of The Interior Castle, which is the Prayer of Union, in which the caterpillar is transformed into the butterfly. So that's how drastic and overwhelmingly, surprisingly magnificent and beautiful our transformation is. We seem to ourselves and to the universe to be a caterpillar, and when we have this degree of transformation, we are transformed. We're butterflies. And she uses that image to describe what happens in prayer, and I think that's wonderful. That kind of transformation that takes place.
And how much opposition they receive?
How much opposition they it was the time of the Protestant Reformation. Spain, was basically as fascist then as it is now. Franco and Philip II, they're not much different. I shouldn't be saying that on record. But, the point being that the authorities were scared to death of revolutionary movements which seemed to put too much emphasis on individual experience. So the Alumbrados, the Illuminati, the ones who said, we were enlightened, well, that's what they were saying too, the Carmelite mystics, and they got into all this trouble. St. Ignatius had trouble because he wasn't schooled, he didn't have the certificate to say he was allowed to preach and all that kind of thing. So, and you can understand, the anxiety, but you can be sure that anyone who goes this way, not just Christian, Jewish, Muslim, anyone who goes this mystic way is going to butt heads with the authorities, who always want to keep things under control. Mystics, by definition, are the whole universe, and they can't be kept under control. Jesus, if we're following Jesus, how can we expect any different? The servant's not above the master, who ran afoul of both religious and political authorities. It's the same story throughout all of history. But that's the price of transformation, the price of liberation that we go through. And before we have some more questions in this discussion, I want to say one more word about it. I began with liturgical prayer here. We're talking about the liturgy of the hours this afternoon. Just a word about the Mass, what we call the Mass, the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass. None of these words do it for me at all. The synaxis was the old Greek word, the ancient Greek word, the gathering of the community. It's the mystical transformative experience is what the liturgy should be. I remember I spoke about the Masons earlier, and the symbolism of the cathedral, the structure of the church. You come in, and the structure of the human person. You come in, you listen to the Lectio, to the readings, and then you reflect on them. You enter the sanctuary, the angels, the Sanctus, 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 the consecration when you're transformed into Jesus, the communion when you're in the mystical marriage with Jesus. So the whole journey of prayer, the whole journey of the spiritual life is imaged by and presented to share in. I mean, it's the experience is presented to you right there in the liturgy. That's what should be happening. It should be a transformative experience, going through these various stages, different levels of your own being and experience. And the whole universe is united, all time and space is brought together. Is that happening when you go to church on Sunday? Well, it should. Here it's good. Yeah, of course. Here you would expect.
I think if they do the same, the right symbols and they
Yes.
do the right,
Yeah, it should happen.
they bring the right message,
Right.
it does.
That's right. That's what it's for, and that's what all the symbols and the rites, as you say, are meant to do, to bring us into that liminal space, transformative space, beyond our daily, concerns, to a new level of consciousness and awareness, which is why we're not supposed to have our cell phones on in church. But we're listening on a different wavelength, in church. But often it doesn't seem like the ones who are running the show get it. Zip through it or whatever. The kind of pedagogy or mystagogy, mystical instruction doesn't really take place. And I don't just mean by word, but by the action, done in a certain way with reverence and concentration and expansiveness of spirit, prayer, recollection. If it's not done that way, it won't have the effect. just to situate the liturgy of the Mass within this whole broader theology of what it's all for. It's for the transformation of ourselves into Christ. And that's what the life of prayer is for in any form. And there are all these different ways you can do it. And then you can see how it can coexist with and profit from the insights of other traditions. You just said the Buddhists, who show us to get beyond our ego self, to get beyond our categories, to the nameless absolute experience, which is incarnate besides in Mahayana Buddhism, just like in Christianity. So there's a tremendous confluence of spiritual insights and techniques once you're dealing at this level. Not just the level of conceptual worldview and creeds and stuff, but on the level of spiritual experience. It's a wonderful thing. Any other comments or questions?
About the Mass, I think, personally, I think it's what we bring into it too.
What they bring to it, yeah.
I'm really trying to focus more on what the priest is saying, whatever he does, but I'm trying to really focus on the rules of the Mass, and then get a lot more out of it than just going to Mass.
Well, yeah, we should be focused, and enter into it.
But you talk about it is like, I feel personally how that you bring into the sound.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's important that they bring the symbols in the proper way. When a priest, the actions are contemplative, when there is a good homily, it enriches you.
Yes.
So of course we have to bring in who we are and everything, but that helps a lot. My life in the convent, in the monastery, has transformed me. And I don't mean that we are perfect with the liturgy or anything, but it's
that facilitates.
but it facilitates, the life, the rhythm of the times, and it has enriched me.
So I have my difference.
It helps. It does help.
It's both, right?
It's both.
It's both.
Absolutely, but
It's
it
not
helps.
either, but it's and. Right?
And
At the end of the spiritual canticle, John of the Cross speaks about this divine union. He describes how, the soul, the individual, the human person breathes the Spirit into the bosom of the Father, in and with Christ, as partaking in the life of the Trinity, such that an angel looking out from the outside wouldn't see anything but God. So, and then he actually quotes in one paragraph the wonderful verse from 2 Peter 1, where he says, "He has called us through the knowledge of him who called us with his own glory and power, by whom he has given us very great and precious promises, that by these we may be made partakers of the divine nature." Partakers of the divine nature, that all may be one and share that life, that transformation into God. And then this very famous exclamation of John of the Cross, just after he's pointed that out, "Souls created for these grandeurs and called to them, what are you doing? How are you spending your time? Your aims are base and your possessions are miseries. O wretched blindness of your eyes, you are blind to so brilliant a light and deaf to such loud voices, because you fail to discern that insofar as you seek eminence and glory, you remain miserable, base, and ignorant and unworthy of so many blessings." So in other words, he's saying, this is what it's all about. This is what it's all for, our life here on earth. It's not for playing golf. Or if you're playing golf, do it in and with Christ. So that it's helping you. There's nothing that should keep you from God, but even church can keep you from God if you're not entering into it with this perspective of inner transformation. So I think we'll leave it at that. Again, get any other comments? Or so you do have this. God is calling us. Yes.
I only have one comment is
just, you have to do the searching on your, you have to do the searching on your own. You really have to, I felt I've had to do the searching on my own, that's why I'm here today, and I'm listening to you. So for instance, if you want to get a spiritual director, you really have to be careful of what spiritual director you get. So when you just pray and then the spiritual director will come, where do you see?
When the student is ready, the teacher will come.
What was that now?
When the student is ready, the teacher will come.
All right.
But no, that's a little, that's what they say. But there actually is a National Association of Spiritual Directors. You can look that up and see if there's somebody near you. Yeah, and once again, it doesn't, obviously, it can be a lay person, a sister, or a priest, anyone who's done the journey, not just had gone to school, gotten a degree, but has gone the journey themselves. And try people out, and see what might work. Yes?
Could you just make a comment on acquired contemplation, not so much verses, but complementary to infused contemplation?
Yeah.
'Cause I never hear much about infused.
Well, we don't hear about either one.
Well, acquired centering prayer to me is a form of the practice.
Yeah, well, the old textbooks of ascetical theology back in the mid-20th century spoke about this distinction between acquired and infused contemplation. And basically it would mean that, when you go through this process and you kind of rest at the end and you kind of have achieved through this effort a certain calm and integration, at least at the moment, when you're doing it, that's acquired. But once you experience the fact that in this moment you are being swept up by God, that that His own life and grace and experience that you're sharing, that's what we mean by infused contemplation. It's experienced by you as something that's way beyond you and as a gift that's given, as an induction into the divine light and life itself at varying degrees.
Yeah, I think there's so much discernment necessary there, because the first, how you say, impulse is to dismiss it. This is a form of my own self-aggrandizement or fantasy or whatever, and not enough direction is easily not. You can't. It's tough to come by direction or discerning what perhaps is often.
Yeah, well, of course, again, someone who's walked the walk and who's gotten to that level would be able to help you with that. And you're right, it's important to be able to recognize it for what it is, not run away from it, not be afraid of it, because it's kind of overwhelming. It's the definition of the holy that Rudolf Otto gave. It's fascinosum et tremendum. It fascinates you, but it's terrifying at the same time, because you're totally swept out of who you thought you were and what you thought reality was. But it's also wonderful that by the fruits you will know them. Again, St. Ignatius, this St. Paul, love, joy, peace. If it's filling you with that, even beyond whatever, whatever human fright you might initially feel, if you have this deeper joy, love, joy, peace, then that's a sign it's God working in you.
Well, years ago, there's so much confusion and darkness in that experience alone, but in discussing something as would be perhaps infused contemplation, a priest asked me if I wanted to be exorcised.
Exercise, yeah.
That can surely throw you.
Yeah, that would throw you. Because in other words, any kind of being taken over, he would take as a demonic. Whereas we should be taken over, we should be so lucky to be continually, constantly taken over by the Spirit. And my point was earlier that this happens much more often and much sooner than we give God credit for. Literally, we're not giving God credit for taking seriously His own plan to transform us into Himself and to share His own life and love with us in the mystical union, or the transforming union, or the mystical marriage, whatever you want to call it, the non-duality to which we are called. So again, it happens much sooner and more quickly and much more extensively than we think. Which is why people need to know this tradition. All the stuff I'm giving you today is really, really mainstream for hundreds and hundreds of years, but you don't find it today. being taught in seminaries, or maybe even in religious, religious houses.
Yeah, we do that.
Good, good. But you don't.
Probably not as the extent that you have done it.
Yeah, yes. But but it's not current in parishes because the whole priests aren't taught that. Mainly because, well, I mean, this gets into a whole new subject, but I just think seminary training is terribly inadequate. It's too short, and not teaching all the things they need to do. They're not addressing real intellectual sophistication, certainly not psychological sophistication, and nor spiritual sophistication. You're sending them out there because they know how to celebrate Mass and the sacraments and keep the ledgers, and which is all fine, but it's not enough. We're not forming spiritual leaders, we're forming administrators. And which is also why so many pastors, especially the young ones, are just insufferable to work with. Because they've been told that they're the ones in charge and who cares about them. But that's another whole subject. Okay, so we're about ready so maybe you'll approach the last session of Centering Prayer here with maybe a few more additional perspectives on what it's all about, what we're doing. So again, any final? Then we have little small groups you can discuss some of this with, and then a final closing, as you see it on the schedule. We'll do some Centering Prayer first. Yes.
Spiritual directors. Teresa Soloner has a list of spiritual directors who is also practicing Centering Prayer. And I think there are a few of us here too today. So you can get through her too. Thank you.
Yeah, so there's a particular resource. Yes, okay. So shall we...
Are we doing a typical Centering Prayer meetings and something else?
No, no, that's what I want to do, a typical Centering Prayer. As some of you have already noticed, I have some websites here for you. www.Pranic Healing USA, and I'm not sure whether it's org or com, but you can find out. That's Master Choa's group, the yoga teacher. He introduced me to the chakras and to some yoga meditation, but also to the Kabbalah. And some of you know, he has a wonderful book, which just reprinted, called A Universal and Kabbalistic Meditation on the Lord's Prayer. Yeah, it's a universal Kabbalistic meditation on the Lord's Prayer, whereas, so just as we had Prayer of St. Francis in that Twin Hearts meditation, he takes each one of the petitions to the Our Father and collates it with a chakra and a Sephora, one of the energy centers in the Kabbalistic tree of life. He collates all that together. Now, I use it every day. I not read it every day, but I use the practice every day because it's so wonderful. So that's one of the better books there, but you can see what he has. In fact, he'll have it. You can get a CD in which he leads the Twin Hearts. So you can just put that on your player and just do it, listening to his wonderful conducting of the meditation. So that's that website. Some of it might seem a little funny to you. I don't know, crystals and all this stuff, but they're serious people, and it's worth looking at. Just as crystals can be valuable. Then I have my own website here, all the stuff, all my homilies, Zen talks, presentations, and a few writings. MichaelKhalloran.org. MichaelKhalloran.org, and then the final one is just Richard Rohr's. I think he's the best Catholic spiritual writer today.
Yeah.
Richard Rohr. ROHR. Franciscan. He's CAC.org, which is Center for Action and Contemplation, which is a foundation in Albuquerque where he lives. So check that out. Lots of great books, recent ones. And as I say, I've got those 5 books, the Ionic Buddhas here and all of that. Someone was asking, this is a good point. The particular colors associated with the chakras and the Buddhas here are not the same as the customary colors of the chakras in the Hindu system. This is like the different meanings for different scriptures. I mean, or the same scriptures. So this is just one particular program, one particular coherent approach among several in the same tradition. So when you're doing this, stick with this. But when you're doing the chakras and Kundalini, whatever it's a different story. But they're both very powerful and fruitful and coherent in themselves. The same way you have different practices in our own tradition. So those are a couple of things I wanted to point out. Anyone have any final comments or?
We'll usually go back to the circle and we'll give one word.
Okay.
And then,
Oh, you want to go back to the circle and do that? Okay, good.
okay?
So we'll go to the circle and just give one final word or impression. Or...